My siblings inherited everything while I got nothing. Then I bought the family business they were about to lose. The call came during my wedding in Bali. Foreclosure. All 12 hotels. Tomorrow morning. My bride, billionaire heiress Victoria Chen Nakamura, saw the shock freeze my face and whispered, "Should I help your family?" I shook my head. They'd disowned me 10 years ago for being gay. Now they'd see what real power looked like. The phone kept buzzing against my tuxedo pocket, while traditional Balinese dancers swirled around us. Each text from my private investigator contained another confirmation. The Grandview hotel chain, built by 4 generations of Blackwood men, would be auctioned at 9 a.m. Pacific. My siblings had 90 minutes to raise $47 million or lose everything our great-grandfather built with his bare hands after immigrating from Scotland. Victoria squeezed my hand as we exchanged rings worth more than most people's houses. She knew about the family that had thrown me out like garbage, choosing their religion over their youngest son. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the last decade methodically positioning myself to destroy them, or that tomorrow I would own every brick of their crumbling empire. The flashback hit me during our first dance. 10 years ago, standing in this same hotel's presidential suite, trembling as I told my parents I was gay. Mom's face had turned white as communion wafers. Dad's Bible crashed to the marble floor. My brother Daniel, the golden boy destined to inherit everything, had actually laughed. "Finally explains why you never brought girls home." My sister Rebecca just stared, calculating how this affected her trust fund. "You're no son of mine," Dad had whispered, his Scottish accent thick with disgust. The Blackwood name ends with Daniel now. 3 weeks later, the will was rewritten. I got nothing. Not even a mention in the legal documents that transferred $200 million in assets to my siblings. I'd moved to Los Angeles with $800 and a duffel bag, while they inherited a hotel empire spanning 3 states. What they never knew was that I'd recorded everything on my phone. Every family meeting where they planned to cut me out. Every conversation about hiding assets from creditors. Every bribe they paid to health inspectors. Every tax evasion scheme. Every illegal payoff to city councilmen for zoning permits. Years of evidence that would eventually become their downfall. Victoria and I honeymooned at our new resort in the Maldives, but I spent most nights on encrypted video calls with my team. The acquisition paperwork needed to be perfect. Tomorrow, Blackwood Hotels would become a subsidiary of Chen Nakamura International. My new family had more money than most small countries, and they just handed me the keys to financial revenge beyond my wildest dreams. The irony was delicious. I'd clawed my way up from sleeping in my car to becoming CEO of the second-largest luxury hotel chain in Asia. I'd legally changed my name to Alexander Chen after Victoria adopted me into her family before our marriage. My own siblings wouldn't recognize me if I walked up and shook their hands. Plastic surgery had refined my features, personal trainers had transformed my body, and a decade of success had erased every trace of the scared kid they'd thrown away. Daniel had actually tried to court Chen Nakamura International for a partnership deal 6 months ago. He'd flown to Singapore, probably spending money they didn't have, trying to impress investors who were already planning his destruction. I'd sat in the boardroom wearing a custom Italian suit worth more than his car, watching him grovel for a deal that would never come. He looked right through me, seeing only another Asian businessman in a sea of power suits. The wedding reception ended at midnight Bali time, which meant my siblings had 6 hours left before losing everything. I could imagine the panic in that drafty mansion where I'd grown up. Mom probably pacing the hardwood floors her grandfather had installed by hand. Dad rage-calling every contact in his phone book, begging for emergency loans. Daniel and Rebecca scrambling through financial documents, trying to find assets they could liquidate before dawn. My phone buzzed with an encrypted message from my sister. Not Rebecca, but the one they didn't know about yet. My half-sister Elena, born from Dad's affair with a hotel maid 25 years ago. Elena had been feeding me insider information for 3 years, ever since I'd tracked her down and revealed our connection. She worked as night manager at the flagship property, invisible to the family that employed her, but never acknowledged her existence. They're in the boardroom, her text read. Daniel's crying. Rebecca threw a glass at the wall. Dad's having chest pains. Mom locked herself in the bathroom. Another message followed immediately. Security codes change tomorrow at 6 a.m. New management takes over at 8 a.m. Should I prepare the staff? I smiled, typing back. Tell them their new CEO expects excellence. Anyone who wants to keep their job should report to the main conference room at 8:15 a.m. sharp. Elena would deliver the message without revealing who sent it. Tomorrow, when I walked into that boardroom as Alexander Chen, she'd be the only person in the building who knew exactly who I really was. Victoria found me on our balcony overlooking the Indian Ocean, still in my tuxedo shirt and pants, watching the sun rise over the water. "You're thinking about them," she said, settling into the chair beside me. Her black hair caught the golden morning light, and I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her beyond the obvious financial advantages. She was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and completely unafraid of my darker impulses. "In 4 hours, they'll lose everything," I said. 4 generations of work gone, because they chose hate over love. She nodded, understanding immediately. Victoria's own family had built their fortune by being more vicious than their competitors. She knew that business was war by other means, and that family could be the most brutal battlefield of all. "Are you ready for what comes next?" she asked. "Owning their business is one thing, facing them is another." I thought about that scared 22-year-old who'd been thrown out like trash, who'd slept in parking lots and eaten from dumpsters because his family valued reputation more than their youngest son's life. That version of me was dead. The man who remained had built an empire specifically to destroy the people who'd created him. The auction began at exactly 9 a.m. Pacific, broadcast live on my laptop from our resort suite. A federal judge read the foreclosure notice while my siblings sat in the front row of the courthouse, their lawyer whispering desperately into his phone. Daniel wore the same suit he'd worn to Singapore, probably his only good one. Rebecca had clearly been crying, her makeup smeared despite her attempts to look composed. Mom and Dad sat rigid, staring straight ahead like they were facing a firing squad. "Opening bid is $47 million, the judge announced. My representative, a sharp-dressed attorney who'd flown in from Hong Kong specifically for this moment, raised his placard immediately. $47 million. No one else bid. In 90 seconds, it was over. The Blackwood family empire now belonged to Alexander Chen, a man they'd never heard of, but would soon get to know intimately. The real beauty of my plan wasn't just the acquisition, it was what happened next. Every employee would keep their job under new management, but the current executives would be terminated immediately. Daniel, who'd been CEO for 6 years, would be escorted from the building by security. Rebecca, the CFO, would have her company credit cards canceled and her office locks changed. My parents, who maintained ceremonial board positions, would find themselves permanently excluded from properties they'd considered their personal kingdom. Elena sent photos from inside the flagship hotel as the news spread through the building. Staff members hugging each other in relief, knowing their jobs were safe. Managers looking nervously toward the executive floor, wondering what new ownership would mean for their careers. The concierge team actually seemed excited, probably hoping that competent leadership would finally modernize their outdated systems. But the piece de resistance was still coming. Tomorrow morning, I would arrive at the Seattle headquarters as Alexander Chen, new owner and CEO of what would soon be renamed Chen Luxury Properties. I would conduct staff meetings, review financial records, and make strategic decisions about the future. My siblings would have no choice but to accept whatever job I offered them, if I offered them anything at all. The flight back to Seattle took 14 hours, giving me plenty of time to finalize my plans. Victoria worked on her own business deals while I reviewed personnel files and property assessments. The Blackwood hotels were actually in worse shape than I'd expected. Years of deferred maintenance, outdated technology, and incompetent management had left them vulnerable to any competitor with vision and capital. Elena met us at the airport, professionally dressed and carrying a briefcase full of internal documents. She looked enough like me that anyone paying attention might notice the resemblance, but our siblings had spent years avoiding eye contact with the help. "They're desperate," she reported as our car pulled away from the terminal. "Daniel applied for 3 different jobs yesterday. Rebecca's trying to liquidate her art collection." "And our parents?" I asked, testing how the word "our" felt on my tongue. Elena was the only family member who'd chosen to know me as I really was, rather than rejecting me for being inconvenient to their image. She'd earned the right to be included in whatever came next. "Dad's been calling every old contact he has trying to find work. Mom hasn't left her bedroom since the auction." Elena pulled out her phone, showing me security footage from the mansion where I'd grown up. The house looked exactly the same, but smaller somehow, diminished by the knowledge that its owners had fallen so far. The bank's already started foreclosure proceedings on the house too. They have 60 days. The Seattle headquarters occupied an entire city block downtown, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that proclaimed the Blackwood name in gold letters 15 feet tall. Those letters would be gone by the end of the week, replaced with elegant script spelling out Chen Luxury Properties. I'd already approved the architectural plans for renovating the lobby, removing every trace of my birth family's legacy. Walking into the building as Alexander Chen felt like putting on armor. The elevator operator who'd known me as a child looked right through me, seeing only another wealthy Asian executive in a $1,000 suit. The receptionist smiled politely, never recognizing the young man who used to run through these halls during school holidays. Even the security guards who'd once ruffled my hair and snuck me candy treated me like any other VIP visitor. Elena had prepared the main conference room for my first staff meeting, complete with financial projections and strategic plans printed on company letterhead that now belonged to me. 53 employees filed in nervously, whispering among themselves about rumors they'd heard. Most had worked for the Blackwoods for decades, but their loyalty would transfer to whoever signed their paychecks. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I'm Alexander Chen, your new CEO. As of today, this company has new ownership, new leadership, and new standards. Anyone who meets those standards will thrive. Anyone who doesn't will be terminated immediately." The transformation began that afternoon. I fired every executive who'd participated in the illegal activities I'd documented over the years, the head of maintenance who'd taken bribes from contractors, the regional manager who'd been skimming from petty cash accounts, the marketing director who'd been padding expense reports and billing personal travel to the company. They walked out carrying cardboard boxes while security guards watched impassively. Daniel showed up at 4 p.m., demanding to speak with the new owner. Elena escorted him to my office, her expression perfectly neutral. He looked terrible, his hair unwashed and his shirt wrinkled, desperation evident in every gesture. "Mr. Chen," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I'd like to discuss a management position with your company." I let him stand there for 30 seconds, studying him like a specimen under glass. This was the brother who'd laughed when I came out, who'd celebrated getting my inheritance, who'd run the family business into the ground through pure incompetence. "Tell me about your qualifications," I said finally, my accent perfectly neutral, giving no hint of recognition. He launched into a practiced speech about his MBA, his 6 years as CEO, his deep understanding of the hospitality industry. Every word was true and completely irrelevant. What he didn't mention was the cocaine habit that had consumed half his salary, the gambling debts that had forced him to mortgage company properties, or the 3 sexual harassment lawsuits the company had quietly settled to avoid publicity. "Your employment history shows some concerning patterns," I said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside were financial records documenting every questionable decision he'd made, every shortcut he'd taken, every time he'd chosen personal benefit over company welfare. His face went white as he flipped through pages of evidence he'd thought were buried forever. "I can explain," he started, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Mr. Blackwood, your services won't be required. Security will escort you from the building." I pressed the intercom button, and 2 guards appeared immediately. Daniel's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, but no words came. He was still holding the folder when they walked him to the elevator. Rebecca arrived the next morning with a lawyer, threatening lawsuits that would never materialize. She'd dressed for battle in her most expensive outfit, probably bought during better times when the family money seemed infinite. The lawyer did most of the talking, mentioning wrongful termination and breach of contract and other legal theories that dissolved under scrutiny. "Miss Blackwood was never an employee of Chen Luxury Properties," I explained calmly. "She worked for the previous ownership, which no longer exists. We have no obligation to retain former executives, especially ones whose performance led to the company's near bankruptcy." The lawyer deflated visibly, realizing his client had no case worth pursuing. Rebecca stared at me with narrowed eyes, something almost familiar flickering across her face. "Have we met before?" she asked suddenly. "You look—" She trailed off, unable to place the resemblance that plastic surgery had softened but not eliminated. I smiled politely, giving nothing away. "I have one of those faces," I said. "People often think they know me from somewhere." The real test came when my parents requested a meeting. They arrived together, still projecting the dignity that had carried them through 4 decades of marriage and business success. Mom wore her best dress, the navy blue one she'd saved for church and special occasions. Dad had polished his only pair of dress shoes until they gleamed. They looked like refugees from their former life, clinging to appearances while their world collapsed. "Mr. Chen," Dad began, his Scottish burr thicker with stress, "we built this company from nothing. My grandfather started with one small inn, and we grew it into an empire. Surely there's a place for experience like ours in your organization." His voice cracked slightly on the word organization, as if admitting that his life's work now belonged to someone else. I let them make their pitch, watching Mom's hands shake as she described her decades of volunteer work with hotel industry associations. Dad talked about relationships with suppliers, knowledge of regulatory requirements, institutional memory that couldn't be replaced. They were begging for jobs in the company they'd once owned, and they didn't even know they were begging their discarded son. "Your reputation precedes you," I said carefully. "Unfortunately, it's not the kind of reputation we want associated with our brand." I opened another folder, this one containing documentation of their systematic discrimination against gay employees, their illegal activities, and their history of financial mismanagement. "We'll be conducting a full audit of the previous ownership's practices. I recommend you retain counsel." Mom's composure finally cracked. Tears started flowing down her cheeks as she realized they weren't just unemployed, they were potentially facing criminal charges. Dad reached for her hand, his own shaking now, and for a moment they looked like the parents I'd once loved before learning that their love came with impossible conditions. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in corporate restructuring. I promoted Elena to general manager of the flagship property, making her the youngest person ever to hold that position. She'd earned it through years of excellent work that her biological father had never acknowledged. The hotel's performance improved immediately under her leadership, guest satisfaction scores reaching all-time highs within a month. I hired new executives from competing hotel chains, offering them substantial raises to bring their expertise to Chen Luxury Properties. The marketing director I poached from Four Seasons launched a rebranding campaign that emphasized our commitment to inclusion and social responsibility. The operations manager from Ritz-Carlton implemented new quality standards that eliminated the corner cutting that had damaged the brand under Blackwood management. Daniel found work as an assistant manager at a budget motel chain, earning less in a year than he used to spend on clothes. Rebecca took a job as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. Her dreams of C-suite leadership reduced to managing petty cash accounts. My parents moved into a one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, their mansions sold to pay debts that kept accumulating despite their best efforts. But the most satisfying transformation was happening within the hotels themselves. Properties that had been slowly decaying under incompetent management were being restored to their original glory. The flagship hotel's lobby renovation revealed stunning architectural details that had been hidden under decades of cheap updates. Guest rooms were redesigned with modern amenities while preserving the classic elegance that had made Blackwood hotels famous. Elena and I met every week to review progress and plan the next phase of expansion. She'd flourished in her new role, proving that competence mattered more than bloodline when it came to running a successful business. "The staff loves working here now," she reported during one of our meetings. "Morale is the highest it's been in years. People actually want to come to work." 6 months after the acquisition, Chen Luxury Properties was profitable for the first time in 3 years. We'd streamlined operations, eliminated waste, and restored the level of service that luxury travelers expected. Industry publications were taking notice, praising our rapid turnaround and innovative approach to hospitality management. The Blackwood name was already becoming a footnote in hotel industry history. The final piece of my plan activated on the anniversary of my parents disowning me. I arranged for Daniel and Rebecca to be hired as housekeeping staff at the flagship hotel, offering them jobs that paid minimum wage plus tips. They were desperate enough to accept, grateful for any income that didn't require explaining why they'd been terminated from their previous positions as company executives. My parents were hired as concierge staff, greeting guests and carrying luggage for tips. Dad's back wasn't strong enough for the physical demands, but he needed the work too badly to complain. Mom smiled at entitled guests who treated her like furniture, swallowing her pride along with her dignity. They wore uniforms with the Chen Luxury Properties logo, serving the company that had once been theirs. The beauty of it was that they still didn't know who I was. Alexander Chen was just another successful businessman who'd bought their failed company and given them jobs when no one else would. They thanked me for my generosity when I occasionally visited the property, never recognizing their youngest son behind the expensive suits and surgical refinements. Elena was the only one who knew the truth, and she reveled in the irony. "Daniel cleaned the bathroom on the 12th floor yesterday," she told me after one particularly satisfying day. "The same bathroom where he used to do cocaine during board meetings. Dad carried luggage for a guest who tipped him $5, and he was so grateful he almost cried. I could have revealed myself at any time, could have confronted them with their hypocrisy, and watched their faces crumble with recognition. But that would have been too quick, too easy. This was better. They would spend years working for their discarded son, never knowing that every paycheck came from the child they'd thrown away for being inconvenient to their image. Victoria understood completely when I explained the full scope of my revenge. "You've given them exactly what they deserve," she said, as we reviewed the latest financial reports from our various hotel properties around the world. "They chose money over family, and now they're working for minimum wage while you control millions." The irony was perfect and permanent. Every day, they served guests in hotels that could have been their legacy, wearing uniforms that bore my chosen name, taking orders from managers who answered to the son they'd disowned. They would grow old in those jobs, their backs aching from carrying luggage, their feet sore from standing behind concierge desks, never knowing that their employer was the child they'd sacrificed for their precious reputation. Sometimes I watched them through security cameras, studying their faces for signs of recognition that never came. Dad's hair had gone completely gray, his shoulders stooped from years of manual labor he'd never expected to perform. Mom's smile looked painted on, a customer service expression that never reached her eyes. They looked older than their years, worn down by the consequences of choices they'd thought would never matter. The final twist came when Elena discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about my family. She found it in Mom's old jewelry box while helping her move from the mansion to their apartment, a small key hidden inside a secret compartment. The key opened a safe deposit box that contained documents dating back 30 years. "You need to see this," Elena said, spreading the papers across my desk. Birth certificates, medical records, legal documents that told a story Mom had never shared with anyone. She hadn't been born Margaret Blackwood. She'd been Margaret Santos, daughter of migrant workers who died when she was 17. She'd worked as a cocktail waitress in Las Vegas, doing whatever it took to survive, before meeting my grandfather at a business conference. The documents got more shocking as Elena translated them from Spanish. Mom had been pregnant when she married into the Blackwood family, but not with Dad's child. She'd paid for an abortion and hidden the evidence, terrified that her new family would discover her past. Years later, when she couldn't get pregnant naturally, she'd used fertility treatments and lied about the timing to make it seem like all her children were conceived within marriage. But the biggest revelation was in a psychiatric evaluation from 25 years ago. Mom had suffered a complete mental breakdown after my grandfather died, confessing to a therapist that she'd been living a lie for decades. The guilt of hiding her past had consumed her, manifesting as religious extremism and an obsession with moral purity that had destroyed her relationship with her youngest son. "She projected her shame onto you," Elena said quietly. "Everything she hated about her own past, she saw in your sexuality. That's why she couldn't accept who you were. It reminded her of everything she was trying to hide. The documents painted a picture of a woman so terrified of exposure that she'd sacrificed her child to protect her secrets. I sat in my office for hours after Elena left, staring at the proof of Mom's hypocrisy. The woman who'd thrown me out for being gay had worked in strip clubs and done things she'd never admitted to her family. She'd built her entire identity on hiding her past, and when confronted with a son who couldn't hide his nature, she'd chosen her false reputation over his life. The knowledge changed nothing and everything. I could have exposed her secrets, could have destroyed her the way she'd once destroyed me, but that would have been mercy compared to what she was already living. Every day, she put on that uniform and served strangers in hotels that should have been her children's inheritance. She was already paying for her choices in the most poetic way possible. Instead, I decided to let her keep working. Let her keep pretending to be someone she'd never really been. The woman who'd valued appearances over love would spend her remaining years as invisible as the son she'd discarded. She would clean rooms and carry luggage and smile at guests who saw her as just another hotel employee, never realizing that her employer knew every secret she'd fought to hide. 2 years later, Chen Luxury Properties had expanded to 37 locations across 6 countries. We were consistently rated among the world's top hotel chains, known for exceptional service and progressive employment policies. I'd personally ensured that we had the most comprehensive non-discrimination policies in the industry, protecting employees who might face the kind of rejection I'd once experienced. My siblings still worked at the flagship property, their uniforms freshly pressed each morning, their smiles professionally maintained for guests who never looked twice at the help. They'd adapted to their new reality, grateful for steady employment in an economy that didn't offer many second chances to failed executives. They would never rise above their current positions, never again control anything more significant than housekeeping schedules and luggage carts. Sometimes I wondered if they ever thought about their lost brother, the son and sibling they'd thrown away for being inconvenient to their image. Probably not. People like them only remembered family members who could benefit their reputation or financial situation. The gay son who'd reminded them of their own moral failures was easier forgotten than mourned, but I remembered everything. Every cruel word, every moment of rejection, every night I'd spent hungry and homeless because they'd chosen their prejudices over their youngest child. Those memories had become the foundation for an empire built on inclusion, acceptance, and the kind of success that could only come from understanding what it meant to be discarded by the people who should have loved you most. The perfect revenge wasn't destroying them. It was succeeding beyond their wildest dreams while they remained trapped in the consequences of their choices, serving customers in hotels that bore my chosen name, never knowing that every paycheck came from the son they'd thrown away. They would spend their remaining years working for the family member they'd rejected, and the beautiful irony of it would sustain me for the rest of my life.